Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Usually Fixing and Tinkering, this time focusing again on the Ford Focus Mark 1 side of things, as usual for most of these videos anyway, or at least the majority of videos that I make. But this time I wanted to look at a subject that neither I was actually very competent in understanding in terms of my knowledge. My knowledge of Mark 1 Focuses generally extends to Europe because it was a European design car. So naturally, most things were directed in the design language and every other department towards the European version, which I think most people would agree, not being biased or anything like that, being European myself, is that it is the better or the best design of the car with the best quality and size of engines and technology that surrounded these cars appropriate for the time it was built in. Or is it? Are there other markets that the Mark 1 actually did successfully? Well, yes, as you can judge from the title of this episode, we are going to concentrate on America. The American focus is North America, particularly. The North American market was something that Ford wanted to dip their toes into more and have a success in. They had previous success with the Escort that had gone before. They had quite a bit of success actually with the Escort when actually didn't really, I don't think as a car deserves so much success. But they tried to build on that with the Focus, and because the product was such a good product in Europe, there was no way that it wasn't going to be a success in America, and it so was. These cars were amazing sellers in North America, probably sold way more than what was in Europe, only just because of the sheer size and the amount of potential customers out there. But for a small car, for America, it succeeded. It done so well. The sales figures were quite extraordinary. But in North America, it was quite slow to gain Mark 1 as an introduction of the Mark 1 to that market. Ford wanted to test it out in the European market first and then move across to the American market very, very quickly. And it was in September 1999 when production started for the North American market for the 2000 model year. Most of the marketing for the North American Ford Focus models was directed towards younger people, Generation X and Y. There was a lot of directive to encourage younger people to be driving a Ford, especially a Focus. I think most people who drove Fords in most parts of America seem to be of a certain age. Ford had identified that and thought, this is a bit of a problem. So they went straight for the young generation of people who they might just be able to suck in and see if their attention and their trust in the brand was so good that they would buy more Fords in the future. That's the way it's always supposed to be. Well, I've got a feeling from the impact that the Mark 1 had in Europe, there was every single impetus to suggest that it would be just as much a success in America, which it was. But at the time, quite risky, because this is just a typical picture of what one would have looked like straight from the launch. Yeah. They take getting used to, don't they, with the indicators below, well, not really anywhere else other than the side of the front bumper. The front bumper being slightly different with the swage lines being all over the place, and it's certainly similar but to the European models, but not as integrated, and the bumpers also stick out just a little bit more, unfortunately, for the shape of the car. The rear bumper also got the same treatment. The front indicators are also located behind the front grille as well. I don't know why you would need two. It's absolutely crazy. I don't understand that. That really is someone thinking we need to put these indicators somewhere other than the wing. We have to have them. Legislation and safety legislation in America is very tight. We have to put them somewhere other than actually where they're meant to be on pre-facelift European models. So we'll stick one on the side and then we'll stick some behind the front grille. That will look good. No, it doesn't. It looks more like sort of American traffic cop sort of look. And the rear bumper is exactly the same, really. It just sticks out too much. And it really does ruin the profile of what is a really nice car. And most people who own a North American Focus will often say in the forums, I wanted a European car, or I want to get some European bumpers on my Focus. I'm pretty sure that's possible. I don't know if the crash bar is slightly thicker, so you can't do that, but I can't imagine not. So there probably will be a couple of things you have to swap over, but it's very possible. But strangely enough, there are people in Europe with a European Mark 1 who've always fancied getting a North American Ford Focus because of its look, you know, with these bumpers and all the features that I've just mentioned. Not many features, but they make a huge difference in the outward appearance of the car. And I think it's a case of people thinking, well, what I don't have, I would like. And I think it's that on both sides of the pond, where something that is a little bit different to what you're used to is actually quite an attractive thing, particularly if it's a rare thing, especially if it's been imported. I know of a few that have come to the UK over the years. They're very, very rare cars, but they always will get attention because it's a rare import. And it's come from an area of the world where it was never designed to be. But in the start of the production, there was only 3 body styles available, and that was the 3-door hatch, the 4-door sedan saloon in the UK, and the 5-door wagon estate again. A wagon, the sedan, the hatchback. Where's the 5-door? I don't know. I couldn't explain why North American market of Ford decided we don't want a 5-door, despite the fact that 5-door hatches were being made in Europe, no problem. The production starting, I believe, in Michigan. So yeah, it started there, but for some reason the 5-door body shells didn't quite get over for marketing reasons or something. The 5-door hatch did join the lineup in 2002, but for the 2000 model year, you just had a few options. And there wasn't a great deal of options that were different. I think there was a form of electronic stability control that was an option, but it was called something like Advanced Track, or the name given. I'd say the American arm of Ford very much like to call things different names, mainly suited to the market. And Americans like numbers and letters being part of the trim designations, and that's what I'm going to explain next. But generically, there wasn't exactly that many changes. You know, you got all the optional equipment, you know, electric windows. The manual models were still quite popular. There was an automatic version on every single engine and specification, as far as I was aware. It's got to be, it's America. And Americans prefer automatics to manuals, a very like-minded contrast. Although I would say that the UK and Europe are following in the automatic take-up over the last few years. In terms of the interiors as well, the interiors are very, very similar. You might have had some sort of different pattern on the seats, but very much made of the same recycled materials. The biggest obviously difference is we've got the left-hand drive thing going on, and any left-hand drive Focus we'll have the fuse box below the steering wheel basically, and you'll have a little cutout on that lower panel to just take a little cover off, and you've got the fuse board. Much easier to get the fuse board instead of behind the passenger glove compartment, so that probably is a plus point. But equally, having that little cutout actually upsets the swage line of that lower panel. So it's definitely something of a niche that right-hand drive Focuses tend to enjoy. But apart from that, it seems quite accessible. The biggest difference, though, is the fact that you don't have a key-operated lock to open the bonnet with a flip-up badge, which is a derided but an important feature on a Mark 1 Focus, as far as I'm concerned, on every European Mark 1. But on the American cars, they specified that we had to have a hood cable, the hood bonnet. So instead of the key in the lock, you have a cable, which for me is a disappointing thing that feature has been taken away. Maybe it was to do with American safety legislation again, or the fact that Americans just really enjoy pulling their cables. I'm trying to be as detailed as what I can, but there's a lot of information that I don't know myself, but I do know the information on engines as well. So straight from the launch, you had a couple of engines, and that was pretty simple. The smallest engines were both 2 litres. America don't like small engines. You need bigger engines in America. They prefer them. The fuel costs are much lower, so they can afford to run bigger engines, higher power, higher torque, and probably much more suited to North American roads. And the base spec engine, I say the base spec because we've heard of this engine on this channel before, and it's stuffed right in my Mark III Fiesta. Oh yes, the good old Ford CVH. If you bought a base spec LX or SE specification, they were the base specifications, the LX or the SE, you got, particularly on the wagon I will say, you got the CVH in all its glory. But it wasn't called a CVH. It was the last version of the CVH called the 2 litre split port, or 2000 SPI, split port injection. Multiple point injection had been made available on the CVH. It was called the CVH PFE or PTE. And that was done in Europe as an already made conversion from single point CFI central fuel injection to proper multi-point fuel injection running on EEC4 management system, but it went to EEC5, and in the Focus Mark 1 it's EEC5 management system, and it's pretty much shares absolutely quite a few parts with the older engines. There wasn't much development done, maybe a bit of strengthening at the bottom end, nice little cam cover, different sort of side cover for the timing belt cover, with a coil pack bolted to the side, and all the multi-point fuel injection bolted to it, and in so doing made the ultimate version, the last version of the CVH. Well, I say the ultimate version. I say it's the ultimate version in terms of how much power it produces. Yes, the CVH split port produces 110 horsepower. That's not very good, is it? It's not very powerful at all, particularly when you consider that you compare that to the next engine up. So you had the LX, the SE, and your top of the range in terms of engine and trim was the ZX. The ZX, ZTEC stands for ZTEC. I don't know what the X stands for, but the number or letter afterwards designated the body style. So the 3-door hatch was called the ZX3. The wagon was called the ZXW. The sedan was called the ZXS. Simple as that, okay? That's what ZXS, ZXW and ZX3 mean. And obviously the later ZX5, the 2002 5-door hatch, top of the range, ZTEC engine, ZX5. So actually you can break down what engine you've got by the letter. Because if you didn't have ZX5 written on it and you just had LX or SE, you basically labelled yourself as having that split port 2000 engine under the bonnet. And the Americans don't really like that engine. It's too low powered, even for its size. It was just cobbled together. My arguments were, if they had given the bored out version of the Sigma as the 1.7 featuring in the Ford Puma, that would have been a more economical and just as powerful engine as the CVH. But at this stage, that work was still nearing completion. But I think they should have just done away with the split port 2000 engine. They have serious issues. I'm not quite sure why, because in Europe, we never had this issue with it. CVH is a good engine, but with flaws that you need to keep an eye on. Breathing issues is a number one, and I'm afraid these still tend to go through some breather filters and leak oil all over the place, so very old school there. But also, the problem that we didn't encounter much with the CVH in Europe is exhaust valve seats dropping. Yeah, there is a particular problem with the split port 2000 engine where the valve seats would just drop into the cylinder in question, and most probably won't break up into bits. It will probably disintegrate the piston and wow, you'll need it rehoming, new piston, probably a new kingpin, it will be all bent. And there were so many photos and videos and forum chats about SP2000s with a dropped valve seat. And it's always a question that people ask if you've got that engine, if you're Ford Focus Mark 1 in North America. What mileage is it on? Have you had that work done? It's not a very good sign when people are asking that sort of question. So clearly the last generation of the CVH, yes, it wasn't brilliant, and it was just an engine that had done its time, and the Sigma should have replaced it, but for some strange reason they opted for this engine. Maybe it was just the cheap version, and quite frankly they still had the tooling to make the CVH. But obviously the next engine up is the dual cam 2 litre Zetec, proven, trusted, and an engine that had been around for some years, and it did the job. 130 horsepower, pretty well adapted to North American environments, tough, rugged, cast iron block, very familiar technology, and they rarely go wrong, just as like they do in Europe. And that was the basis for the ZX trim, effectively. And that's what all 3 cars were known as. And now I've demonstrated the engines. There was some engine changes later on, but mainly up to 2005, those are the main 2 engines. The third engine was the 2 litre Duratec engine. Now the 2 litre Duratec produces about 136 horsepower, and that engine was basically Ford's rebranded version of a Mazda L series. Ford, for some reason, could not replace the Zetec engine with a complete modern engine of their own, so they decided to go into bed with Mazda, who provided a very nice automatic gearbox, the 4F27E. The 4F27E, by the way, being an option on all these cars as well as the European cars, but it was an option on every single spec and engine combination, whether it was a CVH or a Zetec engine. Quite interesting, because I've got obviously a CVH and I've got the Focus with that particular gearbox, but mating them together, a 2 litre CVH with the 4-speed automatic, oof, goodness me, that would be an interestingly slow drive, but still all the way. But the Duratec 2 litre really doesn't have any issues apart from flaps on the inlet manifolds. They tend to go a bit funny, but I don't think the Mark 1 received that treatment at that moment. I think that was more of a Mark 3 Mondeo thing where it came out a bit later. But in truth, a very good engine, and effectively that engine was only an option in certain states. So I think California, Michigan, Massachusetts, there's a few other states that only allowed the option of that engine, possibly due to tax reasons, or there's quite a few reasons why that would be in terms of legal legislation. Every state's are completely different, which is what North America is quite fascinating with all its states. What you have to think about for anybody in Europe who've never been to America, it's a country with lots of countries inside it. It's as simple as that, and they're all governed individually but are under a sort of umbrella of the United States of America. So that's really how their constitution works, and it's an interesting one when it comes to cars. There was, of course, a number of special limited editions during this run to 2005. There was the Kona edition that I'm just going to read out. Kona, the Street edition, which actually it looks quite good with its fancy alloys. The Centennial edition, which was to celebrate 100 years of Ford. It's very strange because that is a really good edition to do. I mean, over in the UK, we seem to have got black and silver and Edge and Chick and Nelly, and well, there was no Centennial edition. I mean, the Millennium edition was quite nice, and the Zetec Collection edition was really nice, and there was a few others, but the rest of them were really rather meaningless. It was just like, can we think of a colour and just call it the new edition? I'm surprised they just didn't do a red and yellow and orange, to be honest with you, editions. But the Centennial edition, we missed that completely, and I'm not quite sure why it wasn't done over here. It certainly would have had buyers, and it would certainly be a collectible today, and I'm sure it is in North America. Americans absolutely love some of these cars, and particularly the more collectible ones. Those are some of the additions that they brought out, and quite interesting. There was something called the S2 as well, which was a sort of another specification really that was given out around 2001, but there was minor changes here and there. But one of the biggest changes came in 2002, and this car went over to 2005 and mirroring what was going on in Europe, and that was the SVT. Goodness me, the SVT, Special Vehicle Team, it stood for. And yes, that was a basically the North American equivalent of the ST170, or to most North Americans watching this, if you are watching this is not a good advert. Our ST170 is the equivalent of your SVT. They were both manufactured and designed by the same team, believe it or not, with that same famous Duratec 170 horsepower lump with a Cosworth tuned head and forged rods and all sorts of, and obviously the inlet cam has some extremely good variable intake gubbings going on there. Very nice, very clever design. So it has all the features that you would expect in a car to produce such power. And they're very desirable, just like ST170s are desirable in Europe. The SVTs are very popular. There's many of them left. There was about 15,000 that were produced in North America, which is not much considering the large space we're talking about and the market potential. But actually, when you consider that this is a very small car and a very niche product in itself, really, it was quite a success. Most of them are 3 doors, about 10,000 of them, and another 5,000 are 5 doors. And that makes up your SVT, very special car. Very few differences, but again, 2 products under the same umbrella. And I think that was the biggest collaboration with the European side of the Ford operation. And all these cars finished production around 2005, all these trim levels and the split port injection CVH died a death as well, and so did the 2-litre Zetec. There was many changes. Right towards the end of the pre-facelift production in North America, the 2.3 Duratec engine became, well, the 2-litre was introduced as a 2-litre, it became a 2.3, and now it was an option in all states. So that had been changed around late 2004, 2005. In preparation for quite the biggest change ever, so CVH out on its ear, Zetec engine out, and both engines were effectively replaced by the 2-litre Duratec, which was, as I say, the L series that started coming into things, and that engine replaced both under one foul swoop. And everything was streamlined a little bit, which I'll also explain. But we need to look at a picture of one. Yeah. That is the facelifted version of the Mark 1 Focus in North America. The first time I saw one of them, I thought, oh, it's a Ford Mondeo. No, that's a Ford Focus Mark 1 in North America. They've literally got the headlights and the front grille arrangement off a Mondeo Mark 3 and slapped it straight on to the Mark 1. Now in Europe, obviously the Mark 1 had finished production and moved to the Mark 2 very early on. I'd say early on, it did 7 years, but it could have gone on for longer, but we moved on. And you would have thought they would have used the Mark II front headlights and grille and tried to merge that into the bodywork. But actually they found out that by doing a bit of tweaking in the wing and bumper and bonnet department, they can make the Mark III Mondeo front front headlights and grille rather integrate into that bodywork. And I just think they should have just gone to the Mark II Focus. It looks really bad. It doesn't look good at all. Unfortunately, some of the trims actually changed as well. So in terms of your body style, so you have your 3-door, your 5-door, your wagon, your sedan, etc., and you would have your trims. So you'd have your LX, your SE, and then your ZX or whatever it was with the letter at the end. That was gone. So effectively now the body styles were referred to as ZX. So instead of trims, they were actually referred to as the body style. So instead of saying 4-door, so I like a 4-door sedan, it would be I want a ZX4, because the ZX4 would be the 4-door sedan. And then the ZX5 will be the 5-door wagon, I should say. And then the ZX5 would be the 5-door hatch, the ZX3, 3-door as usual, and then the ZXW for wagon. That retained its letter because it would obviously have clashed with the ZX5 being the 5-door hatch. You can't have two ZX5s and one's a hatch and one's a wagon. I mean, this is just so confusing, isn't it? And you're confused and I'm confused. But for some reason, they decided to go from referring to them as, that's the 3-door hatch, that's the 5-door, that's the... Instead of referring to them as that, they were fully referred to as ZXs with whatever the body style was. So in this case, let's say a ZX5, and then you would have a few trims. There was only 3. The bottom spec was the S, and then the one in the middle was the SE, and then the top spec was the SES. I don't know what fella came up with that, but that really is creative. I mean, if they'd have done a 4th model, an even bigger model, would that have been called the SE? And then the SES? Oh, goodness me. I mean, according to my trim designations here, because these cars went on to 2007 when the Mark 1 Focus in North America finally died. But between these 2 years, the S model would usually contain the Duratec 20 engine, so the 2-litre Duratec, with a 5-speed manual gearbox. Okay, so in 2005, that is okay, but I think a bit disappointing that you wouldn't have 6, at least at this stage. You would have thought they would have put a Getrag box on it or something like that, but actually the gearbox that they used wasn't an IB5. Now, an IB5 has a torque limit, so American cars, for their manual cars, never used the IB5. They always used the MTX75 because that gearbox was a bit more old school, a bit more robust. It could cope with a 2-litre CVH, a 2-litre Zetec, 2-litre Duratec and the 2.3 Duratec, which is what the options were here. But on the base spec, you would have got a 2-litre Duratec with a 5-speed MTX75 manual gearbox. You wouldn't really get much, split folding seats, CD player, 15-inch wheels. You got some sort of basic wheel trims on the S model, and then on the SE, really, you just got a few things like air conditioning. So basically equivalent to your this is your LX in Europe if you're talking about this, and then just a dual power mirrors. That's interesting. So dual power mirrors. So that was a technology that wormed its way onto the Mark 1 Focus in North America. Something that we never got on a Mark 1 over here. Power folding mirrors. How interesting. And then remote keyless entry, which was basically, your remote key. Sounds interesting, but it's not completely keyless because you have to put the key in to start it. But keyless entry, yes, absolutely. And then the SES really didn't have much more than sort of 16-inch wheels, and then there was a sort of spoiler on the boot lid, and then a few other bits and pieces, but not really much. But there was a bit more luxury in that car. And again, you could have probably had the 2.3 fitted to that as an engine, if you specified as an option. But most of those trims, the SE and SES, would all get the 2-litre Duratec. And then you have a car that replaced the SVT, because that didn't die. It became the ST. What really epitomises what I'm going to say next is American values and interests when it comes to cars. Sedans are awfully popular, and you would think that I'm about to say that the ST version which went on alongside all the other three specifications, all the other three trim levels, I should say. As an option on the ZX3 and the ZX5, three-door hatch, five-door hatch. Just like the SVT. No. This was only a specification that you could get on the four-door sedan. So basically, you could only get the ST trim. It was a trim, the ST trim, on a ZX4. I've absolutely no idea why you would limit it to the four-door sedan. I mean, in Europe, we would have never had that. We had an ST 170, three-door, five-door, and an estate. The estate was pushing it, but still. But we never had an ST version of a saloon, ever. It was never in the books, it was never recorded, but somehow America always give the card and say, we can do that. These come with the Duratec 2.3 engine, so around 151 horsepower, around about that. Sports tuned exhaust, ST suspension, 16-inch alloy wheels, four-wheel anti-lock disc brakes, heated outside door mirrors, that sort of thing, leather-wrapped steering wheel. Oh, God, there's so many things. There's so many things that they added to this car later on, and the ST name mirroring what was going in Europe, because the ST sort of 170 got dropped for an ST Focus. It was just called ST. Well, we had a few different designations, of course, but that really is what came to be for the North American Mark 1 Focus. A very strange car. A very strange variation, but quite normal to those people who've owned one many years and had much fun, much success, and I've only got good things to say about the Focus Mark 1. And it's just a credit that car managed to even pass into another market successfully without major issues. Maybe some trouble in the split port injection department, but apart from that, not bad at all. Obviously, it depends what states. If you're on the salt belts, you're going to have a rusty Mark 1, and they will probably rust worse in some cases than some of the European models, particularly the UK. So I thought I'd go through that. But the Mark 1 wasn't just successful in the North American market. It was also South America where it got on the act. Yes, the South Americans, they also love the Mark 1 Focus, and at the same time North America was starting production of the model in North America. In Michigan, also there was a factory in Argentina starting to cough out Mark 1s, and it was pretty much the very similar design of the North American market, very few differences. It was mainly in the engine department, so in terms of their engines, they actually had smaller engines. So you could have the 1.8 diesel engine, the Duratorque engine for a start. You could have the 2-litre Duratec HE engine, which it was named in Ford of Brazil's territory. Again, the Mazda L series doing its thing. But also an engine that's very curious and that made its way into Europe because of some kind of accident, really. Unfortunately, they needed quite a small and compact and very robustible sort of engine, more so than the Ford Sigma, which is very strange because the Ford Sigma is as bulletproof an engine as what you will ever get. But they wanted something cheaper that could also be just as robust as a Ford Sigma. So what Ford of Brazil did is they reversed engineered that engine, took away the 16 valves, threw in 8 valves, single cam, threw the belt and put a chain on it, and gave it some what they call a roll finger camshaft design, which is quite interesting. It's actually quite clever. And also threw away the aluminium block for cast iron one. So you could say that this engine is actually really no Ford Sigma whatsoever, and it probably isn't really, but it's based off a Ford Sigma, and that's the Ford Rocam engine, which was known in Europe as the 8-valve Duratec, which found its way into the Ford Ka because Ford needed a replacement for the Kent engine, and the Sigma, being double overhead camshaft, too big, wouldn't fit in the engine bay. You seen the Kas? They're tiny. So they needed a tiny engine, and the Rocam engine fitted straight in there as the Duratec 8 valve. So all those Ford Ka owners with that little 8 valve engine, single overhead cam between about 2002 and 2008 in the Mark 1 Ka, yes, that engine was designed by a bunch of Brazilians, but they knew their stuff. They really were very good at what they were doing. They did a heck of a lot of work into that engine. It was robust enough to work over there. It was even so robust enough that it actually worked on a flexi fuel system, which could cope with all sorts of ethanol petrol combinations. I mean, E85 was not unknown in that sort of area of the world, and that engine coped extremely well, very popular, and it did a fantastic success. And they were the engines. The trims were GL, GLX and gear. There was very few differences between each specification. There isn't really much detail on what specifications were given, but you can imagine it kind of mirrors the American market with 3 different trims, not 4 or 5, just 3. A base, a middle and a top, and maybe a sporty one. But they did get a sporty one. It was called the XR, which was a 2003 model, which was the 2-litre I think it was the 2-litre Zetec engine potentially that might have got thrown in at the last second, but it didn't last very long. But that was the only time that they actually used a sporty variation. And the Brazilians don't really like sporty variations because, well, in that area of the world, they just want something robust that works. Culturally, it's a different thing over there. It's not as meticulous or materialistic as us Europeans and I'd say North Americans. I think we're all quite materialistic. We like things, well, we don't have to have things that way, but we like it that way. I think that's the best way of saying it. Production ended in 2008, so production went on a little bit longer, and then it got replaced by the Mark II Focus a little bit later on. So again, they were the last variation to use the Mark I Focus. And there are a few places in the world the Mark I was also sold, but America, North and South, was quite interesting, and it drew quite a few variations. And the fact that Ford had much success with European cars getting a foothold in North America or any part of America, for either of them to be a success was a minor miracle, because it just shows the true state of how much a Mark I is revered quite in a few different places in the world, and there are not many cars to do that. But I will leave this video with the final conclusion that they might look a bit funny, they might look a bit different to us European people, but I'm sure our European cars not very different and maybe a bit weird to North Americans and South Americans. But the truth is, it's a Mark I Focus. They drive principally at 90% of the same way, with a few suspension tweaks and bits and pieces. They all drive the same way, and they've still got some amazing engines, less so good engines on this side, but they've still got some really good engines, and quite frankly, they've stood the test of time. And both European and North and South America Mark I's contributed to the one designation that not many cars can hold, and that it was the #1 selling car in the world between 1999 and 2005, and that is quite something. So I think that's something for every Mark I enthusiast to be enjoying and pleasured, and to treasure that as much as possible. So I'm going to leave this here, and I think this has been quite an interesting episode. I've certainly learned a lot from this myself, and I hope you have too. And I've tried to make it as simple as possible to understand from a European perspective all the trim designations of North American Mark I's in particular. Anyway, you take care, guys. I shall see you in another episode. Take care.